Hey everybody, coming to you from my little Zoom studio here, and you need to hear this because you're being bombarded right now with these really over-the-top accusations against the president that he's got blood on his hands, that his denial and delay has cost lives, and that basically he took no action until it was too late. The question is any of this true? Let's start back in January. January 15th, the first patient with coronavirus enters the United States from Wuhan. That was also the same day that these impeachment pens were being handed out. But luckily, the administration was on top of it. A couple of days later, January 17th, they were already implementing screenings at San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York airports for flights coming in from Wuhan. But still, even about a week later, our mainstream media was still promoting things like this. Doctors saying, hey, this isn't a big deal, not much more dangerous than the flu. Nevertheless, President Trump did implement that travel restriction on January 31st, even though things like the World Health Organization were saying no need to limit trade and movement. And they largely criticized President Trump's travel restrictions. Same day, January 31st, that Nancy Pelosi proposed the No Ban Act, which would actually stop President Trump from implementing the life-saving travel restrictions that he did implement. So was everybody else really sounding the alarm at this point in time? No, of course not. Headlines like these were being written, and constantly, and by mainstream outlets. Again, I don't blame them. These are the facts they had at the time. Adam Schiff, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, was getting regular updates in that committee. But he didn't even publicly talk about coronavirus until February 25th. And let's not forget that President Trump did talk about the coronavirus in the State of the Union on February 4th. What happened to that State of the Union? That happened. So fast forward a couple of weeks when the president actually asked Congress for supplemental funding to combat the virus, $2.5 billion. What did Nancy Pelosi do? Instead of putting that money on the House floor to be voted on, she put a bill to ban flavored tobacco. That was the priority of the Speaker of the House. You also hear a lot of criticism for Trump being overly optimistic. But this is what Nancy Pelosi was saying in late February, telling people to go out and enjoy themselves for the Chinese New Year.
Come to Chinatown. Here we are.
Same with Bill de Blasio in New York City. I want to be clear, I'm not blaming them either. We all have the same set of facts. Even around the world, places like Italy and Spain and Iran, their cases didn't start to spike until early March. And even they didn't lock down. Italy didn't lock down until March 10th. Spain didn't lock down until March 14th. Iran, not until April 4th. Places like Sweden didn't lock down at all. As these countries locked down, were we just doing nothing? No, of course not. President Trump implemented travel restrictions from Europe on March 12th. And what did the media say? All of that. All of that. Widespread criticism. How could you do this? What's the point of this? Well, does this really sound like an administration that's in denial about this? Of course not. And a few days later, we implemented our own 15 days to slow the spread, which then turned into 30 more days. Okay, fine, say the critics, but what about the PPE? We were well behind. We should have had more in the national stockpile. Yeah, that's true. The USA Today did a fact check on this. As it turns out, most of our stockpile was depleted after the H1N1 virus, okay? And the Obama administration never replenished it. That's the truth. Am I blaming them? No, not really. They don't have a crystal ball. What about the testing? We were behind on that. And that's President Trump's fault, right? Well, no, not so simple. Early on, the CDC started to develop a test, but China refused to give them actual samples of the virus, so it was harder to make a test. And also, they didn't do a great job of it. Also, long-standing FDA regulations prevented our private industry from actually developing tests. The Trump administration reversed those regulations that had been around well over a decade. This is the main point here. If we're going to look back in time and try to suggest that our government should have shut everything down back in February, well, where's the evidence for that? We really going to shut things down when our cases hadn't really started to increase? When it barely started to increase in places like Italy or Iran? Of course not. They didn't shut things down until way later. Do you really think that we should have lost tens of millions more of jobs and livelihoods based on almost no evidence at the time? Is that really a reasonable expectation? Is that really a reasonable accusation? No, I don't think so. Listen, I don't want to blame Democrats for this at all. I don't think we should. I don't think there's a lot of people to blame for this, except for China, of course. It would be time for all of us to give each other a little bit of grace and understand that at the local, state, and federal level, everybody is doing their best to fight the pandemic. And we're going to need to stop the dishonest finger pointing as we move into the next phase, where we figure out how to reopen our economy and fight the pandemic alongside that. Thanks for listening.